We're going to start out with McLaren. Of course, Japanese Grand Prix this weekend. First held at Suzuka in 1987, the only figure of 8 circuit on the calendar. It's hosted the most title deciders in history with 12, including a couple featuring Senna and Prost in 89 and 1990. It's a well-known favourite of many of the drivers. It's known for its iconic S's sequence to kick off the lap, as well as some other challenging corners, including the high-speed 130R. And mixed conditions are quite common at the circuit. And indeed, it is a conversation heading into this weekend, which we will get to a little bit later on. Now, Sam, McLaren are looking to kick off the season with 3 consecutive victories. That would be the first time they'd have achieved that since 1991, believe it or not. Can you see it happening? Do you think they'll be strong here?
You know, I can see it happening. It feels like Suzuka is a track that's really going to benefit the characteristics of the McLaren. If we look back to the last 2 races this season, the first 2 races of this season, then you'll see some obvious strengths already starting to appear with the McLaren. They were fantastic in the final sector at Albert Park, and that's mostly because they could hold on to those tyres so fantastically well in comparison to the rest of the grid. It is quite a fast-moving but heavy cornering section of that racetrack in terms of the rest of the Grand Prix there. And when it comes to holding on to rubber, Suzuka is quite vital for that, especially going through those S sections at the start. If you can ensure that your tyres don't fall apart coming out of there, you've got a lot of rubber to use for the rest of that racetrack, and it means throughout the lap, you could deliver a very quick time. That's what they were able to do at Albert Park. The same can be said for China. They were fantastically quick through Sector 2, and it meant that they were able to use a lot of those high-speed flowing corners to their advantage. Now, they weren't super fast going down that back straight, which is, again, fortunate because while Suzuka is typically quite an averagely high-speed circuit, there are a giant number of heavy straights, so you can't make loads of heavy overtakes into long braking zones, which we had around China, for example. It's not that kind of racetrack. So holding on to your rubber, being able to deliver consistent pace and kind of that mean to median average cornering speed is very important. And Suzuka is one of those tracks where it's vital. So I think historically, McLaren always good through kind of those fast flowing corners. Suzuka is quite literally covered in fast flowing corners. So I see that their advantage will continue to grow here, but I do think actually Max Verstappen is going to be more of a threat going into Suzuka here. If the conditions are mixed, if that Red Bull is starting to feel a little bit more comfortable with it, something he's more used to now, I think he's going to be a bit of a bother. He's been very, very close for the last couple of sessions. He was very, very close in qualifying for most of the sessions we've had. Sprint race where he was right next to Hamilton, less than a tenth away from pole. He was pretty close to Norris when it came to qualifying in China, and he wasn't too far away, of course, from the front row, only a couple of tenths at Albert Park as well. And I actually think that Suzuka might be his best chance at getting on the front row for the main feature race this season so far. So watch out for Max Verstappen. I don't think that gorgeous new white Red Bull is completely out for the count. But I do think if McLaren could just get away without any trouble, they could be quite potent.
I've got to say, I think Red Bull have done a really good job with their one and only special livery for the season, as have Haas.
Well done.
Well done to them both, because, of course, there won't be any more from either of them.
You can see what stake we're parading around today.
I don't pay any attention to steak on any day, let alone April Fool's Day.
Honestly, concentrate on being better. What are you doing?
Their job is banter, and they delivered on the banter.
Okay? No, their job is to be quick.
I loved that they delivered a car covered in meat, and that meat was raw. Hilariously so.
Thank you, Gordon Ramsay. Harry, your thoughts on McLaren? Do you think that they might be strongest again this weekend? If so, by how much?
I think you have to say yes, they are the favourites for this weekend, and I guess if you take the potential for rain apart from this, this could be their most dominant track yet. Because I mean, all the points you mentioned, Sam, but if you've got a good car, and the McLaren is a good car, it's just good everywhere. Suzuka is the place that will highlight it, because if you've got a good car, it's going to work well at Suzuka. So I think in normal dry conditions, this could be perhaps their biggest gap so far in terms of the rest of the field. But there are elements to this that that mean that I think other drivers could get closer than perhaps the car, the McLaren get closer to McLaren than they should be. You know, you mentioned Verstappen. If there is a bit of rain, I do think people like Russell and even Leclerc and Hamilton could challenge McLaren, just based on the fact that Suzuka is such a technical circuit. You need a great car, but you put a foot wrong at Suzuka, you are having an accident. Doesn't matter where you are on the circuit, you're having a crash. It's just such a tight, twisty circuit, and there's gravel and grass everywhere. Yes, come on. But yeah, so the room for error is so little that I think, you know, even if you've got the most dominant car, there is opportunity for other drivers to still beat you if they are prepared to put things on the line. That the likes of Verstappen, etc., may well do. So I think, yes, you're going to be looking at them as the favourites, but I judging by how, especially in qualifying, judging how the first two qualifyings have gone this year, where it's been 800ths between first and second both times, you've got to say that I think this could still be a pretty tight pretty tight qualifying, if not race. So yeah, I do expect McLaren to be favourite. I think on paper they could be the most dominant, but it doesn't always work like that. And I think this could be another weekend where it's going to be close.
I think coming out of China, those that were hoping that the updated technical regs might give us a really level playing field might have just been a little bit disappointed with how the Chinese Grand Prix went, because McLaren were still very dominant even after that change that happened earlier than expected. I know the sprint part of the weekend didn't go to plan for McLaren, or at least as well as they would have hoped. But the actual main part, the actual Grand Prix itself, went very smoothly for the team. They managed to get first, second, pole, and fastest lap. It's the first time that they have done a clean sweep of all four of those things since 2007. So it was a very good weekend for McLaren. Having said that, it wasn't overly dominant. It was dominant, but not massively so. It's not like we saw a pit stop between McLaren and the rest of the field. Ultimately, we had Oscar Piastri winning that Grand Prix by 11 seconds back to George Russell. That works out at about 0.2 per lap, which again isn't substantial, but it's not nothing. It's somewhere in the middle, and it does give the others a little bit of hope that if they can bridge that gap, then maybe they can make something of a challenge here at Suzuka. Sam, what you mentioned in terms of how McLaren uses the Pirelli tyres versus the other teams, that strength might well be very apparent this weekend, because Suzuka is typically pretty tough on tyres. There's a reason that Pirelli bring the 3 hardest compounds in its range to Suzuka every year. They did it last year. They're doing exactly the same this year. They bring the C1, the C2, and C3 tyres. Last year, most drivers did a 2-stop. We saw Charles Leclerc of Ferrari do a 1-stop, and it was relatively successful. It didn't actually look like there was much of a difference between the 1 and 2 stop. But because of McLaren's advantage, maybe we see them 1-stop where other teams can't. Maybe we see them do a better version of a 2-stop where others might need to use a slightly harder compound or not go as long on a certain set of tyres. So I think them having that advantage could be really effective this weekend, and might, as Harry suggests, might give them the biggest advantage they've had in 3 races so far. Now, one team that didn't perform overly well at China was Ferrari, and that was even before the double DSQ. Of course, they walked away from the main portion of the Grand Prix with no points whatsoever. They're currently losing to Williams in the Constructors' Championship. So, Harry, we're going to ask this question as part of our question of the week later on as well, but for a perhaps more serious answer to this, can Ferrari, or how do Ferrari bounce back after that result in China?
I mean, first of all, have legal cars. It's probably
write it down.
Get it in the book.
Get it in the book. Might be really like near the top of that list in the book. But yeah, look, they'll even before the disqualifications, as you mentioned, Ben, they would have left China scratching their head somewhat, because on Saturday they were really good. On Friday afternoon into Saturday morning, they were really good. And then after that,
and they changed their car.
Then they changed their car. Cool. I mean, why?
Of course they did.
We've got a really good car. Let's change it. Nice. But there were encouraging signs from that early part of the weekend that I think they should, hopefully they've understood what they did, where they went wrong, and have taken that into this weekend. Fundamentally, that Ferrari is a good car, and in classic Ferrari style, they're completely ballsing it up at the moment. I think there's a really good car under there.
There's something in there, right?
There's something. It's cooking. It's brewing, but they're simmering. They won't take the lid off it yet because it's not boiling. So I think if they can just stop being Ferrari and nail the setup, Hamilton showed in the early part of the China weekend, that the pace is there. So I think they should be aiming high, because I do think the car has got something in it. They just need to have a sensible weekend. I know it's difficult, Ferrari. I know it's really tough, but just be sensible only for 3 days. You can be silly again after that. It's fine until the next race, but just for 3 days, keep it together, and I think they'll be fine, because I think there's something genuinely there. They've just not exploited it properly yet.
Yeah, I think you're right. They showed in preseason testing they have something, but they haven't been able to extract that so far this season, apart from the sprint portion of the Chinese Grand Prix weekend, which is not the right. It's not bad, but also you'd rather it be the other half of the weekend that has more points in it. But they really need to, because they already have quite a lot of ground to make up. I think you can look at this through a positive or a negative lens. Like, if you're looking at this positively, you might say that car's actually pretty good in high-speed corners, which at Suzuka is a good thing to have. And maybe they could compete with McLaren, or even if they're not competing with McLaren, if they can just be the second fastest team, claim a podium, claim some good points, that is at least something to build on from round 4 onwards. So that's the positive side of things. The negative side of things, they can't run their car as low to the ground as they did in China. Otherwise, they risk another disqualification. Now, I think Ferrari have a new floor in development, but that's not going to be ready until Bahrain. So they are stuck with what they have for now. If they have to raise that ride height to a point where they're just too uncompetitive, that's not going to lead to a great weekend. So they need to strike a balance in between legal and also not too slow. Whether they can or not is another question.
They're going to they'll be praying for rain then, surely, because you don't have to. You can raise your ride height then.
You say that, but they weren't great in the rain in Albert Park either. That's a
valid point. Valid point.
Which is the point I was about to make. That unfortunately for them, the race is looking like mixed conditions, which we spoke about at the very start of the episode. And if it is mixed conditions, Ferrari, out of all the top teams, look like they'll be the team to suffer the most. They don't seem to go well in the wet. They seem to go very well in the cooler but dry conditions on the one distinct hour of a Saturday morning in China. Now, that is very, very specific conditions to be good. And remember how we used to mock Mercedes for only being very, very good in the coldest races, and they only built a car that could thrive in like under 15 degrees where the track wasn't warm at all? Well, Ferrari seems to have done that this year. You don't want to do that, Ferrari. You want to make it work when it is hot, or when it is, just at least normal. Most racetracks are at least in the 20s in their degrees. I don't know what that is, magic Fahrenheit numbers. You do the maths, magic Americans. But the point here is, the car doesn't work. It's got something, as you said, but right as they're setting it up, as they're bringing it to the racetracks, it isn't working. It is not delivering on the potential that it possibly has. And you've got Leclerc and Hamilton, and that collection of talent is just being wasted. It's just sat in a pile on the side because being wasted. So I do think that they're going to need a completely dry weekend. I think they're going to need to be somewhat warm for them to thrive. And I think they're going to hope that they are kinder on their tyres than they were in the full race at China, because the speed that those tyres went off for those two Ferraris in comparison to the others across the full length of that main race was worrying. And yet on the sprint race in Hamilton's Ferrari, he was able to eke out those mediums for much longer. So let's see if they're able to actually get any purchase out of those tyres long term. But I'm a little worried. I don't think this is going to be too successful. I think at best they might be ending up finishing behind the Mercedes of Russell, behind the Red Bull of Verstappen again, and likely behind both McLarens.
It is going to be an interesting weekend from a weather perspective because there could be rain on both Saturday and Sunday. Doesn't look like it's going to be too cold. It still looks like it'll be relatively warm, but we might get some rain on both days. Harry, something that Sam's already mentioned is that rain could be the thing that Verstappen is looking for. Would you agree with that? Based on what we saw in Melbourne, would that be an equalizer to get him in the fight?
100%. I think Verstappen is doing everything he can to get that car up the grid. But there's only so much he can seem to do in dry conditions because at the start of a race, that car is, or at least in the case of the Chinese GP, it was chewing his tyres up. Only later on, it seemed to come alive again. So I think if he wants to be competitive, and to be fair to that point, it was a similar story in Melbourne because at the end of the race, he was right on the back of Norris as well. So it's clearly good when it's got no fuel in it, which is, half the job for F1 cars. So he'll be praying, I think, for rain, and I do genuinely believe that, as I mentioned earlier at the start, it could really bring Verstappen in here because it's all in those conditions. It's all about the driver, especially around a circuit such as Suzuka. It's all about what they can do to extract the maximum performance out of the car. So yeah, he'll certainly be doing a rain dance, I imagine, before this weekend because he often does. And yeah, I think it could really bring him into the mix.
Also, that white Red Bull in the rain at Suzuka with the dark clouds would just look
so many
chef's kiss.
So
Unreal.
many good shots will come from this.
That's how you make a white car look so good, by the way.
100%. It will look great. And hey, they have made the most of it being their one and only.
Ben is like, if I speak it into existence, it will happen.
No. If it doesn't happen, I'm just not acknowledging it.
Yeah. Yes. Dude, I forget that happens. Yeah.
I think Max Verstappen is going to be doing a rain dance until that car is somewhat competitive versus the McLaren. In China, he finished 16 and a half seconds back. And what you said is true, Harry, that they got better as the race went on and the latter part of that Grand Prix was okay. But the first part really sealed the deal. And he was going for the win in Australia. So, of course, he's going to want rain rather than not want rain based on where the two cars are right now. Australia might have been a little bit misleading. I think sort of safety car period and it was probably not as close as it looked, but equally, and Lando Norris might have been dealing with some damage late on in that Grand Prix. But even so, Verstappen was there and challenging. So, yes, I think he will very much be hoping for something like Australia.
I think it's more you see mistakes in the rain. We saw both McLarens come straight off the racetrack in Albert Park. And as we've already mentioned, Suzuka is a GOAT track because it has no runoff. If you're coming off that tarmac, you're going straight into some kind of grass or a wall or a gravel. Now, McLaren are going to be wanting to keep all of their tyres firmly on the racetrack this time around, but they've proven already that both of those cars can come off quite easily. Both drivers can and will come off easily if it rains. Max Verstappen famously rarely makes a single mistake when it comes to that rain driving. So he's pretty much the guy to beat in wet weather. I think he's got a pretty good chance of winning it if it is wet.
Well, speaking of Max Verstappen, he's got a new teammate at Red Bull for this Japanese Grand Prix. Believe it or not, he does.
No
ever
way. That is new information.
Right after this break, we're going to be talking about Yuki Tsunoda's debut outing at Red Bull. It's Yuki Tsunoda, by the way.
Is it?
Yeah.
Well done, Yuki.
Let's move on to Yuki Tsunoda and Liam Lawson because they have switched seats ahead of this Japanese Grand Prix, something that we've discussed over the last two podcast recordings that we've done. But if we're looking at the Japanese Grand Prix separately, Sam, how much pressure is there on Yuki Tsunoda in that debut race?
He won't want to admit it at all, but there are heaps and heaps of pressure upon Yuki Tsunoda's shoulders. He's coming into such a highly pressurized situation where giants before him, not Liam Lawson, have walked and they have fallen. Sergio Perez was considered one of the best drivers on the grid. We, as a trio, have given him so much love throughout his career. He's won races. He's been on podiums. The guy was considered to be one of those guys who never got that top chance at the right time. He got that chance and suddenly we critiqued him like nobody's business. He was not good enough. And it obviously comes to light that maybe the car isn't where it should be. And maybe Perez never fully got to drive the car that he thought he was going to drive.
This is the point where we admit we were wrong about Perez, right?
Oh, so wrong. Yeah, we apologize immensely to everyone out there who's a Perez fan. I'm so genuinely sorry. Is that enough? Did I say enough?
Thierry Henry gif.
Can I have my check? Oh, is this still on air? Sorry.
Yeah.
Kit's sending the check now, mate.
Thanks, mate. Cheers. Thanks, Liam. Anyway, my point here is that there are a lot of very good drivers that are big in that second Red Bull seat. You know, Gasly, Albon, Perez. Lawson's still a really solid driver. You look at his outside of Formula One record, been brilliant. Tsunoda has been another level in the last year or so. He's been really, really fantastic. That doesn't mean he's going to turn up and he's going to be, I think you guys said it in the show that I was off, he's the key. I don't think suddenly he's going to open the door.
Set up genius.
I don't think he's going to walk up to the holy gates of Red Bull. You know, Christian Horner's pounding on them. How do we unlock this mystery? And Yuki turns up and goes, be good. And the doors of
we
Red
can't have
Bull's...
Yuki Tsunoda as Bongo.
And they open because of Yuki, the god that is Yuki, Hall of Famer Yuki. He's a star. We love him. I don't want him to crumble. Like, I think there is a real chance that he gets in that seat, he gets into a competitive session. Max is, I don't know, front row, 4th or 5th at worst, probably. Yuki, I don't think could be any worse than 7th or 8th. You know, he needs to basically be where he would put that racing ball, there or thereabouts. Q3 is almost a must, because if he's out in Q1, he's giving it a lot of talk. And I respect the talk, but if talking made for money and making results, I would be the richest man on the planet, because I say a lot of crap.
Very valid.
Does not turn into anything substantial. So, Yuki, do your talking on the racetrack, deliver where you can. You've said you wanted a podium. I respect that. I respect that, big man. I do. But you've got to deliver on the day, and it's a lot to do. So, yeah, the weight of the world is on his shoulders. He has got a lot to deliver, I think.
Harry, how much pressure do you think there is on Tsunoda for this first race?
I've just, got images now of Yuki Tsunoda with the foam hair from...
like the Elvis quiff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not to go on about the same thing that we did in the previous episode, but there is not a worse scenario here for Yuki Tsunoda to be doing this Red Bull debut. He's had 2 races in one car. You're now being chucked into a different car that you've not driven before. It's at Suzuka, which is technically one of the most challenging circuits in the world. Oh, and it's also your home race. But don't worry, just to add a little bit of pressure on top, we painted your car in the colours of your national flag.
And it might rain.
And it might rain.
And there's rumours that Honda gave Red Bull 10 million quid for you to have the seat.
What pressure? Pressure to the tyres.
Pressure for Yuki Tsunoda.
Yeah. Look, it's a recipe for a nervous breakdown. I would be having one, but I'm not Yuki Tsunoda. So look, he's going to be feeling this. Thank you. He's going to be feeling this a lot, and it's going to be very difficult for him to block out everything that's going on. Ironically, the person I think who's going to have less pressure on his shoulders this weekend is Liam Lawson, and that's ridiculous given he was the one who was dumped. So I'm not saying Red Bull will put this on Yuki Tsunoda, but there's no way that this isn't going to be a tough weekend for him. And like you said, Sammy, he's got to be at least where he was putting the racing bull, because this is the reason that they got rid of Lawson in the first place. That he wasn't doing at least that, which they must see as the bare minimum to be in that seat. So if he's not back up at that point in the field, it's going to be a tough weekend. So I do not envy the man, but I like the fact that he, at least as you say, Sam, as he's talking, he's embracing it.
I think you've both missed a quote from
what's that, mate?
From Helmut Marko. He said earlier in the week that they won't switch back for the rest of the season.
He's an idiot.
Are you telling me this because it's April Fool's Day?
No, he said that, which means 100% it's true, and there's no chance that he would ever go back on his word. So he's got no pressure at all.
Oh, fine. So it could come last. It'll be fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
There's a max, it won't be a problem.
I believe anything that comes out of Helmut Marko's mouth, mate.
I wouldn't even say that for a joke.
No, that's also fair. I think there's obviously a bit of pressure on Yuki Tsunoda this weekend because it's Red Bull. I think there's more pressure on the team than there is on Yuki Tsunoda, though, because let's say, I know what you said, Harry, on like how he performed in the V-Carb team. And if he doesn't do something the same or better in the Red Bull, then there's pressure on. If that happens, I think that makes Red Bull look awful because Tsunoda would have proven he can achieve a Q3 start. He can achieve, I know he didn't end up finishing there because of strategy, but he can fight for 6th, 7th, as was the case in like the sprint race in China. If he can't do that in the Red Bull, that looks awful on Red Bull because then it looks great for Verstappen, by the way, but it looks awful for Red Bull because at that point they can't turn around and say, well, it's Yuki Tsunoda. He can't perform. Well, he's just done it last race, but now he's in the senior team and he can't do it. That's going to make the team look really awful. So I actually think there's maybe more pressure on them because if, let's just say Lawson outperforms Tsunoda, then suddenly I think it's on the car and it's not on Tsunoda this time. He did, as you said, Sam, say that he wants to finish on the podium, which I love it. Sure. In a car that Verstappen has managed to get to 4th and 2nd place in 2 races so far this season, for Yuki Tsunoda to come out and say, I want a podium. Sure. I admire the confidence. I appreciate he can't really come out and say, I just want to make it through to Q2 and then get a 9th place finish because that would be better than Lawson.
I'd love 2 points, actually, guys.
Yeah, he can't really say the opposite, right? But I still respect it. I think my expectations of what he could and maybe should achieve, get through to Q3. I don't even really care what you're doing. Just get through to Q3 and then be somewhere in the top 8 in the Grand Prix itself because I said this about Lawson. The issue was the only reason you could tell he was driving a Red Bull was because of the way the Red Bull is painted. Like if it was a blank car, you wouldn't think he was driving a Red Bull. What Yuki Tsunoda needs to show is that there are 4 clear top teams in this sport: McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull. He needs to show that of those 8 drivers in those 4 teams, he's obviously one of those. Even if it's the 8th of those 8, like as long as he's in touching distance of the Mercedes, Verstappen, whoever it might be, that I think for a first race weekend is enough.
I saw an interesting quote. I think it was from Bernie Collins that she said that if Verstappen suddenly didn't exist and you had Liam Lawson and Yuki Tsunoda in that car, that without Verstappen's results, basically that Red Bull would be the slowest car on the grid right now because it's so tailor-made to Max Verstappen that no one else is able to even get that extra second out of it that's required to be competitive at the top of the field. Then it means that essentially it's running as the slowest race car on the racetrack at the moment. So it's going to be really interesting to see if Yuki Tsunoda's driving style is even remotely close to Max Verstappen's that allows him to get that even 4 or 5 tenths out of it that Liam Lawson wasn't able to make sure that he's on the back of that kind of top 8 train. That's where he needs to be. He's never been brilliant around Suzuka either. I think he's finished 13th, 12th and 10th in the last 3 years. Obviously, he's had a midfield to back end car. He's been relatively consistent, but he's never had a blinder here either. So hopefully this season is the one that bucks the trend. Now he's got this new challenge.
Harry, from Liam Lawson's perspective, you said that there might actually be less pressure on Liam Lawson now that the move has been done. Unbelievably, he's done 13 races, Liam Lawson. He's about to embark on his 3rd stint at VCARB. Sure. What do you expect from him this weekend? What will he want from himself?
To not be last, I think, when he qualifies. That would start. Be look for Lawson. It's I think he's got to beat Hadjar. I know he's not driven this car at all, but versus Hadjar,
Hadjar's had a Q3, so that might be what you need to do.
I know. So then in that case, then if the car's that good this weekend, he needs to be there. He needs to show, because if he's miles off Hadjar this weekend. And obviously they're not switching back, so it doesn't matter. But to be fair, so switching back maybe doesn't mean he'll demote him further down. But if they're, if he's miles off Hadjar, then questions will continue to be asked. I just think he needs, I do believe there'll be more pressure on Yuki Tsunoda, but I think he still needs to be around where Hadjar is and ideally beating him, at least in qualifying, just to show he's got the speed, because we know he does, but there was clearly something he couldn't get to grips with in the Red Bull, and hopefully in a more familiar environment, which is bizarre, but this is a more familiar environment he's going back to. It might help him. So it really depends on where the pace of that racing ball car is. Hadjar showed he could be up thereabouts with Tsunoda. So I think Lawson needs to do the same thing.
Yeah, I think he probably needs to match Hadjar on this first weekend, which, as I said, like that could mean getting through to Q3. That could be scoring points. Who knows? He was very close to Yuki Tsunoda when they raced together in Suzuka in 2023. Tsunoda did score a point in 10th, but Lawson was 11th, and he only qualified 2 spots behind as well. So he's proven against a teammate at Suzuka that he can perform, and he has more experience here versus the other tracks that we've gone to. So it's not only that race that he's done, he's also raced here 3 times in Super Formula, where he had a pretty good record as well. So if he can match Isaac Hadjar, maybe beat him, he'll just be glad that he's going to have like 3 practice sessions and it's not a sprint weekend. I have to say, I do feel sorry for not only Lawson, but just any rookie drivers so far this season, because we've had rain-affected Australia, 1 practice session at China because it's a sprint, and now we're going into another weekend that could be affected by rain. I'm not sure how. I'm pretty sure Bahrain and Saudi Arabia are both going to feature the wet tyres this season, the way it's going. That all of those rookies must just be praying for a normal weekend just to actually get a foot in the sport. But Sam, any thoughts on what you think Lawson should achieve?
He needs to channel the inner sausage. Channel the sausage. Shana. He's got to become Pierre Gasly. That man went through exactly what Liam Lawson is going through. And when he dropped back into that kind of AlphaTauri, whatever the bloody team name was back then, could call it Bob F1 at that point for all I care, he was immediately back on the pace. He was so quick the moment he stepped back into that seat. And we all looked at that guy and went, the guy's a good F1 driver. The guy can drive a Formula One car quickly. He's got something there. And yeah, he never made it back. And you guys spoke about it. I doubt he'll ever make it back again. Liam Lawson is never going to end up back in that Red Bull seat. It seems pretty unlikely, but he needs to now start impressing to go elsewhere. If he wants to retain a Formula One seat for the rest of his career, he needs to start delivering from the moment he steps into that seat again. So, yeah, I think Hadjar is a fair target. The kid's a rookie. He may only have 13 races under his belt, but Hadjar's got 1. And so he's got to make sure he puts that very small amount of experience to use at a track he has raced at more than most others around this calendar. Put it to use and beat him. I think that's the first step he's got to take.
I reckon it's time for some bold predictions.
Gather around, little children, and listen to my song. My F1 bold predictions, and how they'll all be wrong.
Yeah, it hasn't been a great start to the year for bold predictions. China was particularly awful, so we're looking for a bounce back week. Sam, what have you got?
Yeah, I'm going to kick us off, and I think this one could really happen, actually, Ben. So thanks for coming to me first. I'm going with Liam Lawson to beat both Red Bull cars in the feature race.
Be quite funny, wouldn't it?
It would be so funny.
I said it.
I mean, yeah. Oh, there'd be some lucky DNF for Verstappen, I bet.
Hey, I'm not specifying anything.
Yeah, that's true. Pure pace, that's all he needs. So Liam Lawson to beat both Red Bull drivers on Sunday.
Yeah.
Harry, what have you got?
Mine's also around Liam Lawson, but I've just gone for top 8.
In the race itself.
In the race.
Yeah.
Sorry. In the race.
I mean, Tsunoda and Hadjar probably weren't that far outside of that in the main race in China, so it's not ridiculous to think.
2 qualifying in a row, both inside the top 8.
Yeah, if they get another good qualifying session, who knows? I'm going with something completely different. Both Saubers to start in the top 12.
I like that. Juicy.
like a steak. I assume that's why he said it.
That I set you right up there, Ben.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
And you knocked it out the park, son. Well done.
You smoked it.
Pole 1, 2, 3. Sam, what have we got?
Pole, I've gone for Lando Norris. The win, I've gone for Max Verstappen. Second place, I've gone for Lando Norris. And the third, I've gone for Piastri.
Ooh. You can stop predicting Piastri because he won last time. So you're all good with
that's
someone
true.
else's time.
Also, everyone ignore the fact that my bold prediction and my pole 1, 2, 3 are separate. I've done that intentionally.
Yeah, Liam Lawson's finishing like 0th.
Correct. He's so good, they promoted him to the next race immediately.
Yeah, I like that. I've basically got the same as you, Sam, but a slightly different order of the same names. I've got Lando Norris on pole, Lando Norris taking the win, Oscar Piastri in second, Max Verstappen in third. Harry, pole 1, 2, 3.
Pole position, I've got Lando Norris. I'm giving the win to the burglar, George Russell.
Oh, that was more bold than your bold prediction. I love it.
Norris, that can't be that bold. He's been on the podium.
Yeah, I don't think 8th place for a Toro Rosso is particularly bold either, but we move.
Liam Lawson has been last at a DNF. 8th place is big.
Anyway, put a scale like a Red Bull, mate. He'll probably be. He'll probably be up there.
They did, mate, and he didn't. Anyway, win for George Russell, second Norris, and third Verstappen.
Very good. As always, let us know what you think pole 1, 2, 3 is going to look like. And what's your bold prediction for this Japanese Grand Prix? Is it even more bold than what we've got? And let us know when you get some right as well, because even if we can't take the wins ourselves, we like to celebrate others' victories.